Welcome to H2K Infosis. H2K Infosis is a e-verify business based in Atlanta, Georgia, United States. We provide 100% job-oriented, instructor-led, face-to-face, true live online software training programs. It also includes access to Cloud Test Lab with software tools. We provide live project for you to work on. We also provide assistance with mock interviews, resume preparation and review, and job placement assistance. H2K Infosys is trusted by so many students across the world. H2K Infosys provides world-class services in IT training with real-time project work for corporates and individuals, special IT training for MS students in the United States, software design, development, QA manual and automation, performance testing and maintenance, IT staff augmentation, job placement assistance, and tech support.
MVC, nothing but model view controller architecture. We have already seen the MVC architecture with respect to our struts framework. Now we are going to deal with the MVC with respect to Spring. There won't be any difference in terms of the terminology like model view or controller. Everything will represent the same. But the components that will be provided by the Spring framework, those will be different from what we have seen with our struts framework. So I'm going to directly start the Spring MVC framework. There is no introduction required for this. Spring MVC uses the following components. So let us take a look at those components. The first one is DispatcherServlet, and the second one is handler mapping, and also adapters. Next one, controller, view resolvers. Before that, model and view object. Finally, our view. So the entire Spring MVC framework depends on these components only. DispatcherServlet will discuss in brief about all these components, and later we'll see how to use those components when we have entered into coding. DispatcherServlet is just like your action servlet. Whenever we using MVC framework, the controller, it was supposed to be provided by the framework only. That means we'll have a central servlet, only one single servlet. In case of Spring MVC, the servlet is DispatcherServlet. DispatcherServlet is just like your struts action servlet, which works as front controller pattern. Not only Spring framework, any MVC framework uses front controller pattern. That is one of the design patterns. Front controller, nothing but front controller pattern, nothing but it will take all the requests from the container. Normally, your container is responsible for receiving all the HTTP requests. But in case of front controller pattern, your servlet, a single servlet, is responsible for receiving all the HTTP requests. So in case of Spring, the front control pattern will be provided by your dispatcher servlet. So that means you need to configure dispatcher servlet within web.xml file and mention that forward all the requests to dispatcher servlet. Once dispatcher servlet has received the request, dispatcher servlet was supposed to identify what is the URL. So normal, let us say we have submitted the page with /login. So that means for /login, there should be some action which needs to be executed to perform the business logic. So that means our URL to action mapping needs to be available. This is what we have mentioned in struct config.xml file. But here in Spring, your dispatcher servlet won't do all the work. It is just like a front controller pattern, and it will just receive all the requests. And once after that, it will take help from all the different components. So the next component is handler mapping. Your handler mapping is responsible to map the request URL to controller. So your handler mapping, you are going to specify all the mappings, like for what URL or for this particular URL /login, you are supposed to call the controller called login controller. That is the mapping you are going to specify, and once dispatcher servlet receives the request, it will ask the handler mapping to provide the controller based on the request URL. So it won't perform on its own, and it will take the help of handler mapping. The next one is controller. Controller is where your actual business logic will be going to perform. Controller is just like action class in your struct framework. So there we have action, here we are going to have controller. But the difference between action and controller, the difference between your struct action and Spring controller. If you guys remember, for struct action, the dispatcher servlet will create only one instance, and it will create those many threads as per the request. That means it is just like a servlet which is deployed onto the container, and it contains only one instance in the memory, and several threads will be going to create for your action class. But for controller, dispatcher servlet will create a new instance for each request. And the second advantage with controller, it is annotation based. It's not required for you to extend any class and provide definition for abstract methods. So the controllers, whatever that you are going to configure, they are simply annotation based, and it's not required for you to provide the definition for any kind of method. Once your handler mapping identifies the controller, see, you are going to contain a lot of controllers. You can have login controller, student controller, employee controller, any kind of controller you can contain. But with each request, it was supposed to map to a particular URL that will be specified by your handler mapping. Once handler mapping has specified the controller, dispatcher servlet dispatches the request to the controller for performing the business logic. So currently we are at the controller level. So in the controller, you are going to verify whether the username and password are correct or not. And if the username and password are correct, you are going to get the employee details. Once after that, you are going to forward the request to some JSP page, and the JSP will display the model data. Model data nothing but your employee form, which consists of first name, last name, salary, and designation. In case of Spring, it won't distinguish between your model and view. There is a separate object available, which is model and view object, which consists of model data along with view information. Model data nothing but once you have processed, you are going to get your DAO information, that is called your model data. View information nothing but it specifies your model and view object. It specifies the logical name of the view. Logical name nothing but, let us say your JSP file is success.jsp. You are going to create a logical name like success. You are not going to specify whether it is a JSP page or whether it is a pre-marker page or it is a velocity page. From your controller, you can forward to any kind of front end. Currently we are using JSPs, but you can change to pre-marker or velocity, some other different view related technologies that you can use and display the information. So you are going to forward only the logical name, and once you have forwarded the model data and the logical name of the view, so to where it will forward the response, to your dispatcher servlet, because your dispatcher servlet has called the controller and the controller performed the business logic. Once after that, it has created the model and view object based on the response received from the DAO. And finally, the dispatcher servlet contacts view resolver to identify the actual view that needs to be rendered. So your dispatcher servlet identifies that I have received a logical name, but not the actual view that needs to be displayed. Then it will ask the view resolver to figure out what is the view that I am supposed to display. Once view resolver has resolved to a particular JSP page based on the logical name, your dispatcher servlet dispatches the request now to the actual JSP page. While dispatching, it will set the model data, whatever the model data that you have prepared, it will set in one of the scopes, nothing but either it can set in request or session scope. So that means you can just make use of your EL and display the data onto your actual view. This is the whole flow of your MVC controller. MVC. Let me know if you guys haven't understand any of the components. Are you guys clear? Last two components. Or else Vijay, let me explain one by one. I will explain in detail with respect to each component again. DispatcherServlet, this is just like our action servlet. So what are all the steps that we need to do for our action servlet? We need to configure our DispatcherServlet in web.xml file. That is the first step. That means you need to specify the servlet tag, and then specify the servlet name and servlet class. And once after that, specify your URL pattern. So your URL pattern, it can be either star, that means we'll forward the request to our DispatcherServlet for all the requests, or else you can use the extension as star.htm. HTM, if you guys verified any of the Spring developed applications, you'll see that the request is submitting with the .htm extension. This is only to confuse the user, like what kind of a coding that server side is using. Or else you can simply specify a slash, which means forward all the requests to our DispatcherServlet. Either of the choices you can use. Once you have configured your DispatcherServlet will look for your Spring configuration file. Here is the tricky one. It's not required for us to specify the name of the configuration file. Let us say you have mentioned your servlet name as Spring MVC. Spring MVC you have mentioned. Let us say you have mentioned the servlet name as Spring MVC. Then your DispatcherServlet will identify or will look for a Spring configuration file with the name Spring MVC-servlet.xml file. It will just append -servlet to your servlet name, and it will look for that particular configuration file under your runtime, web content, web.inf. So you should place your Spring configuration file under web content, web.inf folder. And the second thing is you should follow the convention as your servlet name -servlet.xml file. This is a must. The first step has completed. You have configured the DispatcherServlet, and your DispatcherServlet was able to receive all the requests. And once after that, it was supposed to contact the handler mapping. So your handler mapping is responsible to maintain all the resources to, all the URLs to resources mapping. That means with the /login, we are supposed to contact login controller. With the /index, we are supposed to contact index controller. No need to follow the naming convention. Just for our understanding purpose only, I am placing index as index controller. With Spring 3.0 version, Spring has enhanced the existing classes and all, and it has incorporated annotations. It has incorporated annotations. So that means it's not required for you to perform or to maintain any of this stuff. You can write a controller. See, normally you are mapping the request to the controller itself, right? At the controller class itself, you can specify what is the request. Let us say you have written an index controller. You have mentioned that this is a Spring controller class index controller you have written, and you have mentioned with some annotations that this is a Spring controller. Actually, that is not the actual annotation. We'll discuss about that. And here itself, you will mention that I want to invoke the index controller whenever a request, whenever a HTTP request with the path /index as triggered, and your handler mapping will look into your controller file but not at the Spring configuration file, because you are not going to maintain any of the configurations within Spring configuration file. It's not required for us to write any kind of hard coding stuff within Spring config.xml file itself. You can inform to the container or your handler mapping by mentioning at the controller level itself. Only thing you need to do is you need to inform to the Spring framework that I want to use annotation based handler mapping. See, currently this was just like a normal handler mapping, and the class name is bean URL handler mapping. Bean named URL or bean URL named. We'll take a look at that. So this is the actual class which will perform your mapping from resources to your controllers. But with 3.0, we are not interested to write all this code. Let us say you have 50 request resources that was supposed to map to 50 controllers. That means you are supposed to write all the 50 at this level, which is like an hectic process. So instead of you doing all those stuff, you can just inform to the Spring framework, hey, I don't want to configure within my config.xml file. I'm just specifying at the controller itself, and the controller and the handler mapping class it should be responsible to verify all my controllers and create the mapping. That means it will verify each and every controller class. And it will maintain the list. Like for /index, I'm supposed to call index controller. That is what we have mentioned by using bean named URL handler mapping. But with the default annotation base, it will verify the controller classes and it will prepare the mapping by itself. The next one is adapters. See, when we are submitting the request, let us say we are submitting from login.jsp. When we are submitting, we are going to send username and password. Those needs to be available to our controller class, then only our controller can process the business logic. Your adapters are responsible to perform populate the data that is required for the controller. So not only username and password, it will populate all the HTTP request objects, response objects, cookies, headers. It will take all the responsibility of populating the information that is required for your controllers. For adapters also, there is one available which is related to default annotation based handler adapter. It's not required for you to specify the name. It will by default will consider default annotation based handler adapter. But handler mapping, even though you see that this is default, but this is default with respect to annotation. You should specify you are going to use a handler mapping which is related to annotations, or else by default your Spring framework will choose being named URL handler mapping.
Krish?
Yep.
Is this what do you call cleaner way to do by doing the default annotation based? Because for some reason, if I make a mistake,
no,
when exactly does it create that mapping?
That we'll see. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying that within a class file, you're going to put that mapping, that slash index is the index controller?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the next one is, so your controller has received the request now, just like how our action class has contacted the processor and processor has contacted the DAO and finally responded back with our employee form. So now our employee form was available. Once your employee form was available, you are going to send the employee form back to our JSP page. Normally, if you have request attributes or response attributes, you are going to set in that particular scope and you are going to respond back to the JSP page. But in case of Spring controllers or Spring framework, it's not required for you to add to any of the scopes. You can make use of a simple object which is model object. The model object is related to UI package, nothing but user interface package within your Spring org.springframework.ui package. UI is nothing but user interface package. So your model is just like a map which consists of a key value pair. So you are going to set whatever the data that you want, you'll just set within your model. See, currently I want to provide employee form back to our JSP page. So once you have set like this, your Spring framework will set this particular object. See, this is just like request.set attribute. But here you are using Spring related model instead of using request or response object. That's the difference. So once you have prepared your response, nothing but once you have prepared your model data, the final step is to prepare the logical view. Logical view, nothing but it is just like a string. In our struts action also, we have responded back with a string and your dispatcher servlet will identify what is the forward path. This is also just like the same. But they have enhanced in such a way that it can work for any kind of UI frameworks, not only with respect to JSP pages.
So many of our students have given testimonials on how our training programs are. You will find them on kudzu.com and on our website h2kinfosys.com. On our website h2kinfosys.com, you will also find more detailed information on who we are, the courses that we offer, what each course covers. Also, if you're interested in a demo program, please register on our homepage on the left-hand side. Just give us more information about yourself and we will send you a link for a demo class. The demo class is absolutely free. Experience our commitment by just attending an orientation workshop at no cost. Our team of faculty and advisors are here to guide you with the right information. If you still have more questions, please feel free to call us. Call us at 770-777-1269. This is a United States number. If you're calling from the UK, call us at 020-337-17615. You can also email us at training@h2kinfosys.com or h2kinfosys@gmail.com. Thank you for watching our videos. We wish you a great career in information technology.